Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Athletic Perspective podcast. I'm your host, Mike Jorgensen, and this is the first official episode of the podcast. And today, I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Fergal O'Hagan, as well as a close friend and former teammate, Mohamed or Mo, Yusuf. Today, we're going to talk about the development of mental skills with athletes, specifically the Mindfulness Acceptance Commitment program that Fergal uses in his role as mental skills coach with the Trent University men's rugby team. This program was developed by psychologists Gardner and Zella Moore and is outlined in their book entitled The Psychology of Enhancing Human Performance. Mohamed joins us as a former captain and graduate of Trent University and the men's rugby program to share his personal experience participating in this program with Fergal, as well as his thoughts on the utility of developing the mental side of an athlete's performance. So give it up for Fergal and Mo, and let's get the show started. If you guys want to start, tell us a little bit about who you are and what your role is.
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm the mental skills coach for the Trent men's rugby team, and I have background in rugby myself, having played senior men's at a competitive level, and taken an interest in my own performance as it relates to my various mental states. I was invited to get on board as a mental skills coach by the previous coach, David McCulley, who was, David always took a very holistic view to athlete development and saw mental skills as being a very important part of that. And I jumped at the chance, and so 4 years later, I'm still involved and doing the mental skills with the guys, group work, individual work. Really enjoy it. I guess why do I do it? Well, my bag really is about helping people develop their potential in whatever circumstance they find themselves in, and so mental skills in sport and rugby fit right into that. And I just as an old warrior rugby player, I just like hanging with the guys and kind of living vicariously through them.
What about yourself, Mohamed?
I'm a recent Trent graduate. I finished my honors arts degree here in psychology. Also was able to complete my thesis with Professor Fergal and Professor Navarra. As Fergal mentioned, he was able to do the mental skills training with Trent men's rugby, and I was able to do that with him throughout my full 4 years at Trent. He was able to really help us with doing our mental skills before and after training and figure out how we're going to be different as a team in the incoming year compared to other teams and what we've been doing. And then I also did, like I said, I did research with Navarra and Fergal, and we were able to look at how self-esteem, affect, and self-confidence changes throughout an athlete's experiences with sport, and specifically looking at in-season compared to out-of-season. So that was something really interesting I got to do in my senior year. I would say rugby has helped develop my mental side because I've kind of learned how to use my metacognition to my advantage. Just the idea of thinking about your thinking and thinking about your emotions and why you're feeling these emotions. And just, during our mental skills training, we're able to have discussion and open forum with the guys where you might not be able to talk about certain things in certain platforms, but whenever we would have our MST sessions during training camp or during season, we're able to, discuss things such as, okay, what's the difference between, panic versus urgency, and how does it feel when you're down, or how does it feel when guys are acting in a certain way. So it just give you that much more of an edge going into a game, because then you can be thinking about things before games and thinking about things during games while you're performing, so that you can perform to the best of your abilities. And I just think that was one real big asset that I've had going into rugby, especially doing Trent men's rugby, that has made me a better rugby player, because I have that little extra niche in my belt of the mental side of the game compared to the physical and the endurance based side of it.
you've played a pretty high level of rugby beyond Trent too. Do you want to speak a little bit about it? You're just like Mr. Sports right now. You have his Ontario Blues shirt on and U19 because we're in Peterborough right now at Trent University, so the U19 World Lacrosse Championship is going on right now. So do you want to just chat about that a bit?
Yeah. So right now I just finished my summer semester at Queen's, be a teacher's candidate. So when I came back, I got emailed by the department at Trent to do this cool opportunity where I could be on the news panel for the U19 Women's Lacrosse World Championships. And it's just been amazing getting the chance to really, because my main job title is part of the news bureau, is just going out and talking to athletes and kind of having a main focus for the day and kind of just producing articles based on what focus that we have in a given day. So for example, one of the days was we had a game that we featured, which was the Haudenosaunee, which is our Six Nations between Canada and the U.S. Girls came from all over to comprise in the Haudenosaunee team, who haven't participated in the tournament for the past 20 years, so this is their first time back, against a Belgium side who was having their first time in the tournament. So it's just cool getting the chance to talk to all these sorts of different athletes. Like if I look in my notes right now on my phone and I look at my voice notes, I'll have quotes from players from Kenya, Australia, Japan, New Zealand. So it's just a great opportunity to work with so many international athletes. And as Jorgensen mentioned, I've been blessed with the opportunity to play with a lot of different clubs. And it's just the idea that like this opportunity, I just love to find different opportunities to, put myself out there, whether it's, driving 2 hours to go to practice in Burlington to try and make a Blues team, or, giving up long day weekends or giving up Canadian weekends so that I can go to Montreal or go to Syracuse to participate in certain activities that will just put myself out there. And in doing so in the past couple of years, I've given myself the opportunity to grow and also just have my name out there in the world of rugby, just because I wasn't able to do so as a young person growing up playing age grade rugby. So now that I have the means and the travel necessities to, put myself out there, I'm trying to, give every opportunity to put myself in the best situation to be the best rugby player that I can be.
Just to clarify for the listeners who might not know, the Ontario Blues, that's the provincial senior men's rugby team, which Mo has been involved with in the past. So like I said, today the main focus is talking about mental skills, and I just wanted to break down some of the conversation around mental skills and just start by addressing common myths or misperceptions that athletes and coaches and parents and even fans and beyond that have around what mental skills are, how they're applied, and what value that athletes get from them. For example, one that I heard just the other day was mental skills are only for high performance athletes. But you don't have to be a highly competitive athlete to find benefit in a little bit of self-reflection. So I'm going to put that out there. Any common myths or misperceptions you guys want to address?
Well, one of the things that I often lead an introductory session in mental skills with is a slide of, there used to be, there's this guy named Uri Geller who claimed that he could bend spoons with his mind. And so I have an image on the slide of a spoon bending, and it's not that. Okay, and nor is it I have another image of a guy sitting in a lotus position levitating, and it's not that, right? We're not bending spoons, we're not floating in the air. What we're doing is coming to understand ourselves better as performers, I think, becoming more self-aware and improving our ability to be present in the moment and to go forward and perform in spite of the challenges that our competitive environment poses and our our internal experiences, because those are the things that often get in the way, and those are the things that we talk about when we talk about mental skills and the mental side of performance. It inside of that, implicit in that, is the idea that our thoughts and our feelings are acting on us to either better how we're performing or as obstacles to performance. So mental skills are not some kind of supernatural, developing some kind of supernatural ability to overcome barriers in performance. They're about our own human experience and really ways to enable our focus and our ability to be present.
Did you find that, Mo, when Fergal first introduced the mental skills piece, that you knew exactly what he would be working on, or that it was just mental skills was just this, this concept that you didn't really have an idea of exactly what it was?
Yeah, so when we were first coming in first year, and I first understood the idea of like MST, I kind of looked at the schedule and I saw all these MST sessions and I was like, what's that? And one of the upper tier players was like, oh, that's our mental skills with Fergal. And I was coming in thinking, be like, this is a lot. Like, I feel like as much as we devote to like our physical component of the game, I was just like, we should be working on a lot more, like throw in some like extra weightlifting sessions just like that my throwouts when I was first coming in. But then as I began to progress through it every year, I learned how pinnacle of a part it was to actually playing at a high performance and to be able to like being the best player that you could be. And at first I guess the mental skills of like athleticism really didn't click into me when I was going through high school. Right. And as I came into university and I think taking psych also helped, because a lot of the concepts that Fergal would bring to be, sure. I would be learning in things like my intro to learning classes or like behavior modification with you, or even in my earlier years. So it's like you hear these concepts in the classroom and you start to learn about them and you're like, oh, okay, that's like kind of like a cool thing to learn about human behavior, but then you actually implement it into something that you really care about, such as rugby for me. And as the years progress, began to click with me more about like how important it was to actually like delve into the idea of mindfulness and like just understanding, like a lot of it was like operationalizations of, okay, you want to be faster. What are you going to do to like actually go out and do that? Those small little minute things that you don't really think about when you're putting goals towards yourselves. That's an example of what mental skills helped me do, that helped me improve my side of rugby. So I think it was just a mixture of not only growing in maturity with respect to like the different facets of what one person has to do to improve their game, right. But it's also just the idea that mental skills isn't something that you have to do just like once a week and you're done with it. Something you do all week, and then when we would have our MST meetings, it would be, okay, what have you guys done this week that we can now talk about so that we can put you in a better position going forward in the following week.
And that's something that I've heard a lot from other athletes and even coaches too, is the initial buy-in is sometimes tough, because I don't think necessarily that the athletes see the value if they haven't been doing that before or implementing that into their training. And so I could as especially as a university athlete, with all the other stuff that you guys have on your plates, just to think like, here's another session, here's another thing just added to this already immense pile.
Right.
Or maybe just along those lines, Mike, like when I'm working with the guys, like I'll put it out to them. Could you imagine yourself at the starting line of a 26-mile, 42-kilometer marathon, not having done any training and going and run that race, right? Okay, so let's look at people's mental skills. The same idea applies when you go out there and you're not having a good day, and let's say your focus isn't there, and you tell yourself, oh well, I just need to switch on, I just need to focus, not having taken any time to practice those skills prior to that. Mm-hmm. Like there's this assumption that somehow our bodies and minds work different from each other when they don't. It's the same process of skill development and practice that goes into developing yourself as an athlete, physically, as it does mentally, right? And so I think that's kind of what Mo was speaking to there, yeah, in terms of applying them. And one of the sticking points that I see is you're trying to put, in a certain way, you're trying to put an old head on a young body, right? And
impart wisdom.
But yeah, you try to impart some wisdom, and the thing is with the athletes, they're not necessarily in a developmental space where they can onboard that right away. Sometimes they have to see it in action, maybe hear it from the older guys, maybe actually take some time to experiment and practice themselves with it before they can get on board with it. The other thing that's really important is having a culture that's focused on growth and growth mindsets within the athletes, and the head coach in particular being on board with the mental skills side of things. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see that growth mindset as being such a pivotal piece, because if you don't have buy-in from all levels, it wouldn't really work. And I like that analogy of the old head on a young body. It's with mental skills, that's something, you need to do it. It has to. You don't get better by reading it from a book. It's something that has to be, your mental skills have to be flexed, have to be worked, have to be practiced. You've given us a few examples of things that you talk about with the athletes. Why don't you take us through just briefly what the program that you're running with them is, sort of as you present it to athletes. So this is the mindfulness, acceptance, commitment approach.
Yeah. So I guess I didn't start with this, just to story it a bit. I started with, your more conventional skill development in imagery, goal setting. But I really felt that there was a foundation of mental skills that was missing from that approach, that kind of pure skill approach.
Now, do you find that was something that was sort of unique to the Trent team that you identified, and so you wanted to address it, or is this just that level, that age of athlete?
I think it's more of a general phenomenon, Mike. Like it gets back to the change, what I call the change agenda, that has been developed over time mainly through what's called cognitive behavioral therapy and that stream of thinking, where performance problems and mental health problems are looked at as a result of dysfunctional thinking patterns and kind of a lack of personal direction. What that says is what we need to do is we need to change these dysfunctional thought patterns, set goals for ourselves, and get our heads into this idealized as this optimum performance state. The problem with that is when you talk to athletes, and whether they're performing poorly or well, that optimum performance state is a very elusive thing, right? Most of the time we're performing, we're out there, we're preoccupied with either our last play, last move, last pass didn't go well, so God, I let guys down, what did I do next? Like, those are the kinds of things that that our experience is mostly comprised of, not kind of a continual flow state when we're performing well. So then the question is that change agenda the actual way to go? Or do we change the function of those thoughts and feelings in terms of how they're impacting on our performance?
Yeah, like I can think back, and I'm sure Mo, you can relate to this too. It's just so many times of just being in a bad headspace and not really knowing how to shake it, and just but not even realizing it in the moment. Like in real time, it is. That's your experience. That's just what's happening. And then afterwards, just thinking, why couldn't I have focused on this, or why couldn't I have brought myself back, and and then it almost snowballs, I'd say.
Yeah, because you're fighting essentially with your own experience at that point. If I show you a picture of a pink horse on a screen and then ask you not to think about that thing, what are you naturally going to think about that thing? So if I'm saying to Mo, hey, you know what, these thoughts that you have about your own inadequacies and the last, that last scrum that got blew up and you got manhandled, just stop thinking about that.
Yeah.
And so in trying to blunt thoughts like that, those thoughts are the focus of what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So they're always going to be there. So that I saw as problematic, and there's a lot of research on cognitive behavioral approaches to changing health and performance that tell us that doesn't work. And so I started to think about, no, we need a program that's going to provide foundational skills to enable athletes to learn about themselves as performers, and to be psychologically flexible. Because when we need the psych skills is when we're under stress, right? And that can be the short-term stress of a game situation, but it's also the grind of a season. Like, how do I continue to motivate myself to practice, develop my skills, maintain this growth mindset, even in the face of disappointments and poor performances.
Right.
And so that brought me back actually to approaches that I had used previously in rehabilitation for clients who, in the same way, had problems with performance, mainly their work performance, caused by pain or depression or fatigue and these kinds of things. And essentially those experiences, like the pain and fatigue and depression, they weren't going to leave, right? Couldn't sort of think their way out of it. But is there a way for the person to continue to act towards their valued things that they value in their life despite those things? And that approach works really well. So in transferring it to the situation with athletes, basically it's a matter of looking at, okay, so can we experience these things, these negative thoughts and emotions about ourselves, and perform in spite of that? And that is really the focus of the MAC program, the Mindfulness, Acceptance, and Commitment program.
Is that so? That's around, like, building around the idea that, you know, change what you can change. Don't worry, or don't focus on the stuff that you can't change.
Yeah, control the controllables. You know, don't worry so much about the rest. Mm-hmm. Like last year, for example, we got off to a bit of a bad start, and we had a session all around that. So it was like, you know, and the basic question was, can we control the outcome of the game, ultimately?
Do you remember that session at all, Mo? Or
I'm trying to think back to it, yeah, and like when I remember it was like it was off the 0-3 start that we had, and it was right before the RMC game that we were going to play, and I think, like, from what I can remember, from what I got about that conversation, it was just the idea that guys were getting on themselves for things that they couldn't control. So, like, we can't, like, one of the things we mentioned was we can't control how much the other team prepares, or for what the other team schemes, or for how the ref is going to call the game. But we can control things such as our work rate. We can control things about our clinical ability to perform, our preparation in going into that game, and our mindset in that game. So it's just the idea that guys are too focused on, you know, things that they couldn't control, while they weren't focusing enough on the things that they could control, if I'm remembering properly.
Pretty, like, you know, if we believe that we have this limited attention for the things in front of us, Mo, mm-hmm. Guys' attention was focused a lot on the ref.
Yeah.
It's too hot out. It's this, it's that, and the other thing, and not on the great game plan that Tom and the other coaches had laid out for them, right? And so, you know, so we talked about that and tried to reestablish a focus on controllables, the things that we can manage. And I think it carried forward then into the RMC game last year, and then on, you know, got some success there, and the momentum sort of built from there. Yeah.
So how does your program do that beyond just talking about it? How do you, you know, like, what skills or what activities or things do you suggest that athletes do to help them with that?
So there's 6 processes that have activities related to them to develop. Okay. That underlies the program. And it's not that we completely ignore skills, you know, like imagery, that kind of thing, or that goal setting isn't a part of this, but it's sort of it's part of a larger package of things that go into developing this idea of psychological flexibility.
Could you just give a quick summary of what you mean by imagery?
Well, we have the capacity as humans to construct realities in our mind, and those realities come in the form of images, both visual images, and, you know, I can ask you, for example, to image something. I can ask you to image what it's like to hunker down in preparation for a scrum. You played in the front row, played in the pack. You can very well imagine that, and you can imagine it both from a first-person perspective, in terms of what you're seeing, but also a third-person perspective. You could image You know the game well enough that you could have an image of yourself in proper body position, engaging, and I mean you can to a certain extent you can incorporate other sensations into that. And so imagery is about using our ability to create these multisensory images, experiences, in order to either develop skill, motivation. You can use it in rehab, recovery, a number of different ways.
Great.
And I mean, we can talk a little. I'm not going to talk about that today. We could talk about that a little bit more another time. But those skills, I think, require a platform of psychological flexibility to use.
So there's sort of secondary or higher level activities that you need to build up towards.
Yeah. And for example, imagery is very difficult if you're not able to focus yourself, right? If your mind is continually drifting off in this direction and that direction, it's very hard to form coherent images. And so therefore, present time awareness is a fundamental skill. And that's often referred to as mindfulness. Okay, and so one of the 6 is present time awareness, and present time awareness or mindfulness is the ability to be in the moment in a non-judgmental way.
So do you think with mindfulness, do you feel, because that's a term that I feel like gets thrown around a lot lately.
Totally. Yeah.
So this real-time, non-judgmental, being within the moment, just, do you think that's how others perceive and understand that, or is that just kind of a buzz term?
Yeah, I think people sometimes they take it as being, sitting on a meditation cushion, right? And that is, you have to be quiet and on a meditation cushion with your finger and your thumbs together, palms turned up. And that's what mindfulness is, right? But you can be aware and in the present when you're brushing your teeth, when you're making a meal. Consequently, you can be present and aware when you're going through the drill of throwing into a line out, doing prep work for scrummaging. And to most effectively develop yourself, you have to, in a certain way, be an observer of yourself. And that's what present time awareness does.
I just want to say, on that, I think a big part of that is just, I feel like as human beings, especially in this society, we always are, either looking behind us or looking in front of us towards something we've done or what we're going to do. So, a perfect example is on a line out. So if I'm throwing a line out ball, I might not necessarily be too focused on getting it to the second jumper. I might be focused on the idea that, okay, after this, I have to go around and I have to hit up this ruck because only the 12 and the 13 are going to be in there, and that's my job. Or I could be thinking about, man, I missed a bad tackle before that line out going into it. So it's just the idea that, to be completely focused on the thing that you're doing is the idea that you can be in your optimal state while you're doing it. Because if you have your mind somewhere else while you're doing something of a different caliber, then that's when you start to drift, and that's when you start to be out of that optimal performance. So being aware of what you're doing.
This happens in real time. You can be mindful in stressful situations, in high, in very intense situations, in fast-paced situations, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily understand, is that being present doesn't necessarily mean there's not a little bit of craziness to that present state.
Absolutely. Because I think one of the things that you wondered about is does taking a mindfulness approach to things mean that you're not aggressive, right? That you're not leading into it, and it's absolutely not that. And in fact, if you're aware in the present, you're going to be more in tune with how much you have to assert yourself in a contact situation, let's say, in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish. And at the same time, using controlled aggression in a way that isn't going to wear you out as a player or inflict injury on yourself. So if you're aware and present, it keeps you in that space. And I think what Mo is talking about is exactly right. We're so often consumed with regret for our previous mistakes, or trying to project into the future as to what I'm doing next. And that is, the thing about that is that's an evolved capacity that humans have that is our natural state. In fact, in psychology, there's what's called the default mode network, which is a system in the brain that allows us to do that kind of thing. And it's very valuable because it allows us to plan into the future, and also look back on mistakes in a way that we can carry forward and correct them. But the thing is, when you're thrown into that line out, you don't want that system working, right? You want to be right where you are then, and letting your motor system do what it's trained to do in putting that ball in, or taking that shot on a hockey rink, or hitting that tennis ball, right? You don't want to be in the midst of that trying to look back and look at what you've done wrong and correct it in that instant. So present time awareness is really important. Acceptance is another foundational skill or foundational process, and acceptance is really about, in that present time awareness, you're going to experience things that are negative. Okay?
Like negative thoughts.
You're going to be feeling anxious. Anxiety is a form of activation in the body, and it's biological, it's psychological as well. It's getting you ready to deal with some form of threat or challenge, depending upon how you frame it, right? And so acceptance is really about letting that happen and not placing judgment on it one way or another. Just accepting your experience, not trying to avoid it, evade it. In fact, in pure acceptance, I like to encourage athletes to develop a curiosity about their anxiety,
As in, why am I feeling this?
Geez, this is interesting. So my gut's turning here. And what else do I feel in this instance, right? Not necessarily trying to explain it, but getting really in touch with the phenomenon. Because if I ask you to repeat a word that has a certain meaning for you, good or bad or whatever, and I ask you to repeat it again and again and again and again and again, try it yourself. But soon you'll find that it's lost its meaning as you engage with it.
Just being used to it being present?
It's just being used to it being present. And so acceptance is a way that athletes can come to accept these negative experiences that are going to be, it's not, as I said, it's not flow experience that's the main thing that's going on. It's anxiety, right? It's am I going to perform well here? And so coming to accept that, and that's a process that's foundational to performance.
And I think that's so important to acknowledge, because you might think that your anxiety in that situation or negative cognitions around a mistake you made or something like that are all encompassing or unique to your lived experience, but they're not, right? Every other athlete has gone through exactly the same thing that you are. And I think that's one area that mindfulness, acceptance, commitment approach that you're taking really works well.
Yeah. Maybe I'll move on to values-based action. So another foundational component is identifying what we value, and then subsequently, so why are we engaged in what we're engaged in? And that's where we get into the idea of sport and involvement in sport as a vehicle for personal growth, and trying to get the athletes to think a little bit more deeply about what it is that they value in their sporting experience, because that will carry them forward through difficult times and enable them to maintain their focus and their intensity in training and so on and so forth. So that's values-based action.
Mo, did you have any input on that? Are there particular values that guide those behaviors?
I think one big one is respect for the game and respect for your opponent, but also respect for yourself. So I think part of being captain last year, that kind of was brought out a lot, because I was always kind of had my mind all over the place when I was playing, and even when I had my exit interview with my coaches, one thing I noticed was even though per se my numbers were better as going forward this year, I knew I wasn't the same player that I was last year, being in my third year, just saying, okay, Mo, just go for it. You have no captain responsibilities. You can be a leader, but you have really no responsibilities going forward. Just go out and be a beast, go play. And I kind of had a different mindset. I know I kind of trailed off the question, but that was something I was thinking about. So it's just the idea that having that different mindset when it came to okay, you're not just a 4-3 guy performing. You're also the captain of this team, so that's something you have to take into consideration when you're dealing with guys on the team, or you're dealing with the opponents, or you're dealing with the ref, or you're dealing with people at the athletic center trying to figure out stuff for your game day management. So I think it was just a general sense of respect for others and respect for myself kind of pushed me going forward. Like one of the like things people know about me is like I'm very ambitious, so I love to like put myself forward and like to grab opportunities. So whether it be like learning opportunities for guys or like learning opportunities for myself, if I see something during practice, it's not just holding on to it and like having just like that kind of elf in the room. It was just addressing it then and there and being like, okay, I respect you guys enough to let you know that this is not working, and that you guys like you're not working hard enough, or like you're not pushing yourself as much as you can push yourself. So I guess in a sense leading by example, as well as that common level of like respect and just like seeing opportunities form, whether it be through mistakes or like through like the good times,
Right.
just letting guys know to be like, okay, we can be a better team because of this mistake. We can be a better team even after this win. Like we still left stuff out there on the field. Like we still weren't all we could be during that drill, or where like we were running that line wrong. It was just kind of like, I think the general sense of like respect helped push me play.
Yeah, I think that's a good point that you bring up, that transition from your third year play to your fourth year, and how your values, it's still, they're still there, but they fluctuated maybe a little bit just as your role changed. And I think that's something that's interesting too, is as players' roles change as they transition to different teams or have different roles within the same team, like that leadership role, where your values were maybe more internal focused, but you couldn't be that internal focused as a leader. You had to have those external considerations too.
Exactly, and it'd be the difference of like last year something goes wrong during last year going into third year, something goes wrong during practice. I could give my opinion, but it wasn't like the be all end all. Like I would either listen to like what Jordan or what Will were talking about and like how things would go through there. But if something went wrong in practice or something went wrong in a game this year, people would look at me, and that kind of that was just, it was different. I learned that like the very first practice when I came back from my Blues campaign. I was just like, okay, this isn't me just like going out there and being a performer. This is also people looking to me to be a leader, and that changed my values going in, being like, okay, this isn't third year or like from any, you're not just going out there as a player, you're going out there as the predominant leader. So I think that like being in that different situation put me in a different mindset and changed my values because of it.
Even though, change your values, it's still, like you said, based around that foundation of respect.
Yeah.
It was respect for yourself and your ambition that you recognize that you have, to respect for the team, the club, the culture, and otherwise.
I think in a sense it's kind of like, you're right, it didn't change it. I think it put it in a different focus.
Different light.
Because I was very respect and ambition were big for me from first year to third year, but it wasn't for the things I thought about in first and fourth year. It would be the ambition to blow a guy up in a ruck, or the ambition to like hit a line or stuff like that. And I still had that going in the fourth year, but it was also like, okay, what are we gonna, like, if there's a penalty on their 5, are we tapping going? That's my decision to make at this point. We're on a scrum on their 20 and we're beating Western, but like we're thinking about, okay, hey guys, what do we want to do here? I'm like, let's push them. Let's take this scrum and go forward. Just having that ability to have those decisions put on me then put me in a different mindset when I was going forward. So like you're right, like the respect and ambition was still there, but it was put to a different use, I feel.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Picture kind of.
Yeah, bigger picture type stuff, less about my individual play and more about the team play.
Yeah. So, Fergal, getting back to the values, did you want to?
Well, just picking up what Mo was saying there, I think a basic value that's being expressed is that of service. And for you, how that value was expressed changed from one year to the next, and I think you might have experienced the same thing, Mike, with your time with the Trent men's team as well, in that you went from pretty predominant leadership role, and then in your last year coming back, you took a more quiet kind of leadership position, I guess, but you're still operating in a way that was values based. So operating in a way that's values based as opposed to purely kind of goal driven, instrumentally goal driven, allows you to be more flexible, right? It's like, okay, so what are my values? And in this instance, how can I best express them through my behavior? And the second thing is, in the team environment, it's really important that we're all pulling in the same direction, right? If you go into things where we have clarified our values and express them and sort of brought them together into a shared vision, then it's much more likely that we're going to have cohesion among the group. So it's an individual thing, but it's also a thing that is going to enable the larger whole to function better.
I think just going off that, I remember last year, I think the best example of that was during our Guelph game when it was kind of like a goal and a value-based driven game that we had, because it was the idea that if we were to get a certain amount of tries to get a bonus point, then we would have secured a position going into the playoffs. So, and I remember when Doug was talking to us about this, he's like, as much as winning this game would be a priority for us, the main priority is getting into the postseason and getting these 4 tries. And the idea that guys were so bought into that idea, okay, we're going to be driving our offense through the roof during this game, and that's going to be the main focus for us. That actually is what brought guys together to play in all different facets of their game. And I remember even going into halftime of that game, for what most of the league thought was going to be a blowout game for Guelph, the score was like 21-25 for Guelph going into the half. And guys weren't just saying, okay, let's get these 4 points. Guys are saying, okay, let's try and win this game. So it's just that idea that like once you have that like bought-in goal and everyone's kind of like ready to go based on that, then they can elevate themselves, saying that like, I guess we have nothing to lose. Not in the sense that like the game isn't important, but it's just a sense that like guys are playing fearless rugby.
That's something that you've recognized or identified as an area of your game that has developed over the last few years.
Right.
From your transition from high school to university, and now university to more post-secondary education and working, playing with the Blues and so forth.
Yeah.
How would you motivate a teammate to engage in developing the mental side of their game, specifically around mindfulness? Like how, as a leader, was there anything, or as a captain, was there anything that you did that said, just be in the present, enjoy the process, enjoy right now, or how do you get other guys to buy in?
I think one thing that I always told guys before games was like, and this was something that I was told in Blues by one of my coaches, it was the idea that be perfect at the things that don't require talent. Whether that meant like work rate, or whether that meant guys being aggressive, or that meant guys, like constantly being in a state of like awareness. There's just the idea that like there's a lot of, like Fergal said, there's a lot of things that you can't control. The things that you can control, be perfect at that. And I think a lot of that was me encouraging self-assessment for guys. So one thing is it's so easy to judge others and like based on information that you don't have, and just saying like, if that had been me in this situation, like things may have been different or whatnot. So I think it's a lot of self-assessment, and self-assessment can happen all the time. So it can be before games, during games, or after games. It's just the idea that like you're constantly in a state of like, okay, this is what's going on for me right now. What can I do to be better? Or like, what did I do here that I can see myself improving on? Because a lot of times I think people look at pragmatics and say, well, this person is better than me in X, Y, and Z. And I'm just like, there's a good 20 more alphabets in that, and there's what I mean. There's so many other things that you could look to that they may not outsource to be. You look at these other things and you say, this is what they're better at me. Then I'm like, well, there are so many other things that you could do that would make you of value to this team.
That's excellent insight.
Well, and it kind of gets at another point when it comes to psychological flexibility, because which we call, or I call, self as context. And what Mo was talking about there, so let's say an athlete goes into a competitive situation and they have this idea of their abilities, or their self, and how it's expressed in that situation that's pretty rigid, right? Like, I'm the best scrummager, or I'm a really good checker, and that winds up being disproven. If you have this really rigid idea about yourself, this is what we call a conceptualized self, then that's going to have a lot of negative impact on you. But if you take the stance like Mo was suggesting here, where you be the best at the things that you can control, you're really adopting, you're really stepping back from that and detaching from that whole idea of me as a label, to more the idea of me as something that's like an entity that's in development, right? And not that I'm being bettered and that's affecting my ego and causing me to feel really crappy about myself. And so that's another thing that we try and develop this idea of self as context, it's almost like you're kind of looking at yourself and your performance like you would a movie in a theater. But you're not getting so wrapped up in the movie that you don't see the person down in the front getting up and going out to get popcorn. And there's just a couple of other things in the framework. One that relates to this idea of the labeled self is a thing that we call diffusion. And basically the idea there is that, like, from the time we're very little, verbal behavior starts to exert a big influence on our on what we do. So, you know, you're a little kid and your mom or dad says, don't reach out and touch that stove, it might be hot. Okay? So what's being set up there is a rule that in this situation, in front of the stove, don't do this particular thing because it might result in a bad outcome for you. Your hand gets burnt, right? Kids take that on board, and a kid might repeat that. Oh, don't touch stove, right? My hand gets burnt. But over time, you internalize that to the point where that verbal behavior goes inside. So we learn things like that, but it doesn't stop there because we're continually developing rules for ourselves in terms of how we behave. And the problem becomes is when our rules or our thoughts about ourselves become our reality rather than a product of our mind and our mental activities. Because the mind is there to think. It does it all the time. And it does it in a way that's, you know, mainly good for us, but sometimes not so good for us. The problem is that we get entangled with our thoughts to the point where they just become our reality. A player at practice, for example, who knocks a ball on or makes a bad pass or what have you, creates this idea about their performance like, oh, I'm just not on today.
Right.
And so that becomes a rule for them for the rest of the session, such that they don't get much out of it. Rather than taking a step back and saying, oh, that's an interesting thought. You know, what is that about? Why is that being produced? Right? And so diffusion is a way that we use to separate ourselves from our thoughts so that they don't become our reality. And then the last thing is committed action, which really, that's where we start into goal setting and all of the practical things that we do to perform. And I guess that's all of the rest of these things. They all work together to create this flexible athlete who can deal with stressful situations, be it in the moment, in competitive situations, or over the course of a long campaign, to maintain their focus.
Yeah, because that's something, you know, we see that so much in training for sports is periodization and focusing on, you know, building during this period or recovery. You know, all of that's focused around like physical periodization, whereas you don't really hear about that in the mental capacity. But to be mentally tuned in to that level, at that level for, you know, across a full season, it's draining. And especially, you know, using Mohamed as an example, as a varsity athlete who also has, you know, university expectations and research and family and everything else that goes on. You know, that's such a critical piece is to consider. Because I reflecting back, I remember when our season would end, I would just close myself off for 2 weeks because I was just exhausted. Not even just physically exhausted. Usually, you know, you get over that in a couple of days, but I just, you know, mentally exhausted.
Yeah.
Everything that you'd worked towards for the past 365 days until that moment where it just resets and now you're looking forward at that point next year.
Yeah.
You know, the concepts that you talk about with this program would develop an athlete who's able to address that, is able to, you know, live in that state where there is a little bit of chaos and navigate that chaos effectively.
Yeah, I think, you know, I didn't think of that, Mike, but I think that that's a great point, is that, you know, these skills aren't confined to your performance as an athlete. These skills are life skills, right? And when you, like you say, you hit the end of the season and what's next, there's a big vacuum, right? Like, you're not playing, you're not performing, you're not getting the positives back from that. What happens then? right? How do you replace that? And people who have these qualities, for example, you get to the end of the season and you're kind of feeling draggy and, a bit down, that kind of thing. I mean, if you have a perspective on things that allows you to accept those feelings are not going to have such a negative impact on you, right? You're going to be able to continue on with your studies and that sort of thing in spite of feeling those things.
So thank you for going over the program, and thank you, Mo. I want to just go give everybody a chance to just say some final thoughts. I'm going to take leave and go first on this, because there's a story that I really want Fergal to share, and he's told me this once or twice before, and it's about an activity that you pose to the Trent athletes to take home with them. And you're talking about life skills, and I think washing dishes.
The dishwashing activity. Yeah. So, each of the things that I talked about, present time awareness, acceptance of experience, values, committed action, diffusion, selfless context, each of those have things that we do to work on them. And to work on our present time awareness, I get the guys to go home and wash a dish for 5 minutes.
A single dish.
A single dish. And what they have to do is first pick up the dish. They have to observe all the different qualities of the dish, right? And they have to pick up the washcloth, and they have to start running the water, and they have to at the same time observe the qualities of the cloth and the water. They have to, and for some of these guys, this is a new experience, perhaps. Right? Well, actually washing a dish. And then they need to start washing the dish, and they need to observe and be aware of its smoothness, right? And all of the physical qualities of the dish. And what I tell the guys right from the get-go is that, and I ask them about this after they do it, does your mind wander? Well, of course it does. Do you start to think, what a stupid thing this is that I'm doing? Of course you do. But that's your mind doing the things that the mind does. And part of the exercise is not just learning about the contours of the dish, it's learning about the contours of your mind and the kinds of ways that your mind behaves. And so we use that exercise to help develop present time awareness.
So Mo, when you went through and did that activity, I don't think Fergal's feelings are going to be hurt, but just honestly, what was your initial impression? Were you just thinking, what the heck is this guy making me do?
It's just so much water. Oh man. I think the one thing that I want to do to make it, I guess a lot more worthwhile is I would get the dirtiest dish that I had in my house at the moment. I was like, okay, this is gonna be my project. It kind of helped me learn the idea of present time awareness, because I'm a big dishwasher in my family. It's being in a Somali household, everyone kind of pitches in. It's just we East Africans, that's something we do. So I kind of start the dishes, and then by the time I'm done, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm done. It's like when you're driving to work or driving somewhere familiar, and you're just you get in your car, you get and then by the time you turn the engine off, you're like, oh, I'm already on campus. I didn't really experience that whole thing. So there's this idea of really being aware of the dish I was washing, and all of the other people will hear this and be like, how does this sounds like such a mindless activity, but really when you have to when you were forced to pay attention, and you were actually forced to be in the present time washing this dish. And for some of the guys, they're probably just they probably got just a regular dish out of their cabinet, but for me it was even when the dish I knew was clean and I still had 2 minutes left on the clock, I was just okay, I know it's it's frustrating at the time, but it's just I acknowledge those feelings. I was I'm just gonna keep powering through. And I think a lot of other things came in, acceptance, just the idea that okay, I'm feeling these feelings, I will accept them, but can I perform in spite of these feelings? So I think I kind of drew everything together that Fergal was kind of gonna because it was one of the first activities we did, and then we started getting into things. So it was kind of foreshadowing the idea of okay, when you were washing that dish, how did you feel? And the guys kind of talked about it afterwards, and we were having that collaborative discussion. And so it was just a lot of frustration, a lot of aversive feelings, but the guys all learned the idea of present time awareness and acceptance in that one activity, being okay, we're going to get through these next 5 minutes, even though I'm only a minute in and I'm already frustrated with this. I'm going to keep doing it. And everyone came out with a clean dish.
Well,
So,
that's the benefit, or why I like hearing about that activity so much, because that just shows how much people look into the future. It's what am I going to do after the stupid dish is washed?
Yeah.
And you get frustrated. But imagine, let's transfer that to the context of a game. Imagine you're a winger in rugby and you just haven't got the ball. You haven't got the ball all game, and you're waiting, and you're frustrated, and you're upset, but what you're focusing on now is not your job to wait for that ball to come to you or to make the play or get in the position or whatever. It's your frustration that you haven't been able to engage in any of the play. And so, even though it's that you're waiting for the dish to be washed or waiting for the the ball, I think that those aversive feelings, that frustration, like that's something that translates so easily to a game content. Like everybody feels that at some point in a game. We're frustrated about something usually, right?
And I think that's when you start to become complacent. It's kind of like a learned helplessness thing. I think at that point, that guys think, because I'm feeling this way, I have to act this way. And I think that's where guys tend to like fall off, because it's just the idea of like, I am in this mood and there's nothing I can do about it, in the sense that like I can't change my behavior, but your behavior doesn't have to like your mood doesn't really have to affect your behavior in a sense that you aren't performing to the best of your abilities.
Right.
I think that's where that complacency comes from, and guys start to like get down on themselves. But then the mindfulness comes in and helps be like, okay, have this acceptance, be in the present, go out and actually commit to performing. And if like you said, eventually that 11 will get the ball, or eventually he will get that chip and chase, or eventually he will find himself being used in the game. It's just, it's a team sport, and people are like, there are roles that certain people have to play.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think going back to the this kind of flow experience approach, that points to a danger of that, in that athletes, if they feel that the only way they can perform is when they get their mind into this kind of flow state, but what if it's not there? And it's not going to be there. So that really, for me, kind of puts a nail in that coffin. Makes this approach much more, makes sense, right?
I like the fact that you mentioned how imagery is, it's kind of something you have to work up until, because this program that you're running, so it's based on a book, and when I went to look the book up on Amazon, it was 200 hits of other similar books with similar messages, but just different in different aspects. And I think that's
Right.
what you're saying, with depending on what you need for your team, this approach or these concepts, I think, work really well. And I think, like you said, they work well because they start from the bottom up. They start assuming that people aren't mindful on a regular basis or can't focus enough to develop those imagery skills.
Yeah, because it is based on, the work is based on a book by Gardner and Zella Moore called The Psychology of Enhancing Human Performance, and it's a great book. It lays out the theory and a lot of the procedures for doing such a program. The challenge of implementing it, one of the things is just getting airtime. Like in sport now, things are so, there's such kind of a professional orientation towards athlete development now, that a lot of time, so much time is spent on strategies, tactics, and skills, like physical skills, right? Given that amount of time focusing on those other areas, it really shrinks the time down for doing this kind of a program. So I'm still working out how it best works out over a season schedule and that kind of thing.
One thing that you mentioned before the podcast, before when we were chatting about this, was small bursts.
Yeah.
One or two main points.
Yep.
Little activity that they can take home.
Yep.
Short bursts.
Yeah, with the
minutes.
athletes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and not overloading them. I think it's important to give them kind of an overall picture. I'm really happy that in the way Mo is expressing things here, it seems like you came away with something.
Something like that,
yeah. Which is very gratifying. Yeah.
Right. Great. So any final thoughts from Mohamed?
I was just gonna say, like, to athletes who may be listening to this and thinking that like these are such novel concepts, like every athlete has done imagery at some point. And I know that for a fact because, you know, every athlete kind of has that montage the night before in their head of like how they're going to perform the next day, or, you know, like the fantasy of like the perfect game that you have in your head, and like, you know, you catching that touchdown pass, or you know, like having that good finish in your race. So I think it's just the idea that like we have there is that kind of thirst for like the mental side of the game that players don't really see as attractive, but they do parts of it without even being told to. So I just think it's the idea that like if you're open towards mental skills training and the idea of like what mindfulness can bring to you and your game, like you'll be surprised at how much it helps. And I think a lot of teams are like starting to get on board with that, and it was something novel that I heard about when I was at Trent in my first year. I think a lot more people are starting to get on the bandwagon of the idea that like maybe there is something to this whole mental skills thing. I think it's just one thing for athletes, just like it may seem foreign, but go traveling, like go and out and do it because it's worthwhile.
I like that. Fergal?
I think I'd wrap things up there. Yeah.
That's good. Thanks for tuning in to this episode. If you liked what you heard, check out our website, athleticperspective.com. Again, that's athleticperspective, all one word, .com. On our website, you'll see all the different platforms that our podcast is hosted on. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and follow us on social media. The links are on that website. That's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and we're constantly working to bring more content to you, so stay tuned.